Sure, yeah. Okay, guys, well, a lot of you know me. I'm Dietrich Nissen. I am the Community TV Administrator at Southwest Television. It's based out of Edina City Hall, but it represents Eden Prairie, Edina, Hopkins, Minnetonka, and Richfield. It's the public access. Hey, we're hot. All right. It's the public access station out of that area, and we are partners with Ben Vinar and BCAT here in Bloomington.
Yep.
And yeah, so this is, what number of production club is this, or producers club is this, Ben?
We started in
4?
July of last year. July
It's been
of
that
last
long.
year. So we've done, this is probably like the 7th one now.
Nice. Anniversary. We missed it, though. Dang.
Yeah.
All right, well.
So my name is Ben Vinar. For those of you who don't know me, I am the communications specialist for Bloomington Community Access Television. And yeah, we do these. My wife's calling me.
Nice, Ben.
Can't talk now, sorry. Hold on. Can't talk now, doing a producers club, sorry.
We're alive! Oh, no. All right. Well, anyway,
What?
so
I can't talk. We're live right now. We're recording. Sorry.
to-
I just want to know if you sent Topsy to daycare today.
I can't find her. No, I don't know. I couldn't find her this morning.
all right. Well, guys,
All right.
today I don't have any announcements per se, except
Sorry.
for that I'm taking off for the NATOA conference in Philadelphia. So hopefully we'll learn some interesting things that we can bring back and share with you guys.
What's the conference?
It's NATOA. It's the National Administration of Telecommunication Officers Association.
Wow.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's a group that essentially deals with cable access and just mass telecommunications across the country in general. So there's a lot about the upcoming law changes and programming changes and that sort of stuff. But yeah, Ben, go on. Sorry.
No, yeah. So let's see. New things that are happening here. We Dietrich and I are also partnering on youth programs this summer. We did 2 of them so far. One at the end of June and one at the end of July. And we're doing the third one starting next Monday. And it's been insanely popular. All 3 camps filled up. And so we got another full load on Monday. We're really excited about it. It's just been amazing how popular it has been. And it's a lot of fun. If you want to check out the short films that the groups made in the first 2 camps, you can go to BCAT's Facebook page or YouTube channel. They did a really great job. And let's see what else. In June we got a whole new studio upgrade, so we got a whole bunch of new equipment in the control room and in the studio, as well as some new curtains in here and some other things. And I'm putting together an equipment list right now to order some more stuff. So we got some more new stuff coming in the next month or 2. That's pretty much about it.
Yeah, you want to jump into this stuff?
Yeah, let's jump into it. And I'll just say too that if you got questions about stuff, just write them down and we'll answer them at the end, just so we can get through this.
Kind of keep on pace.
Yeah.
So just a little background. I spent about 7 years as a TV reporter before I started doing this work for the city of Edina and SWTV. So that's kind of where, if you're wondering like, oh, how do these guys know what they're talking about? That's at least how I know what I'm talking about. I did it. I was in the field, daily news stories out of Rochester and Washington, and yeah. So,
Yeah.
but community journalism is pretty unique in that it's actually up to you guys. It puts the power in the hands of residents to go out, find stories, and talk about the community and share about the community, which I think is pretty neat.
Yeah. And I guess a little bit about my background on it. I don't have any like reporting experience or anything like that, but I did work for a news station for a while, and so I saw some of it firsthand there. And then I actually kind of sparked the idea for this production club from I went to the Alliance for Community Media conference in July, and they had a session on community journalism, which I found extremely interesting. So I pulled a whole bunch of stuff from that to put into this presentation. So I think it's going to be really good. Should we go?
Jump right into it. So journalism, what is it? Journalism is the activity of gathering, assessing, creating and presenting news and information. The ideal version of a journalist is somebody who has an unbiased objective and they provide that or a balanced view of recent events. But in reality, journalists are time crunched and they are going to create a production that is going to be subjective just by its nature, depending on who you talk to in a day, the time constraints that you're under. There's so many factors that go into it, but I think it's important to understand that as a community journalist, you can strip away that time crunch and you can actually almost sometimes be a little more objective, I think, because you have the time to process things and you're not so under the gun to get a rush job done, so to speak. So I think there's definitely an advantage to the community journalism part where you don't have a news director yelling at you to get a 5 p.m. hit or anything like that. So anyway, that's kind of at least how I define journalism. Yeah.
So what is community journalism? Usually it's hyper-local storytelling. That's really like what we want to focus on, is like hyper-local. The coverage often focuses on specific neighborhood issues, smaller, not often known about events, unique or interesting characters and locations in the area, and stories only known by a local resident. So a lot of times these are stories that don't get told by, especially not by the bigger media companies out there, national media. Some of the the local news stations and stuff might cover some of this stuff, but this is really like the opportunity for you to cover all of those stories that really do matter to your community that aren't getting told.
And so why does community journalism matter? That's a great question. Like Ben said, a lot of corporate networks overlook the smaller aspects of a community. And as residents in our community, or in our communities, you kind of are on the ground floor day in, day out. Your lives are directly impacted by the events in your town. So you would definitely understand if a new law passes and suddenly it's costing you more money or something to that effect. The key of this is you have the ability to share these stories and you can then broadcast your viewpoints on things to the world. A really fun fact about this is that corporate media often takes ideas from smaller journalist groups that are just put out there, but they catch on to it and suddenly it becomes a bigger story. I'll give you an example. When I was reporting for Rochester, we're a tiny little station, but we had come up to the cities to cover the Republican National Convention. I was walking down in St. Paul and talking with business owners about the impact of the RNC on their business, hoping that, they're doing well, they're making all this money. But it turns out because the security was so tight, they had gotten all this extra inventory, but no one was able to get to them, so they were losing money. That suddenly, overnight, after I did that story, became a huge story on CNN and all these other places who went in and talked with the same people. But it's finding those little niches, like talking with people and really engaging with them, even if you think that maybe they don't have the most fascinating story. You never know what you'll find by going out and doing that. And I think that's kind of an example of just, getting out there and engaging with people, which I think is a strong point of community journalism in general.
Yeah. One thing I just thought of as we were going through this that we didn't really put in our slides here so much, but in a way, social media nowadays opens the opportunity for community journalism in a lot of ways, even for people who have absolutely no video or journalism experience. Mm-hmm. A lot of times these things that go viral on Facebook and whatnot, it's just people out there with their phones. They see like a building caught on fire and they, go live on Facebook and it gets shared by thousands of people or, whatever. So that's, something to keep in mind too. We do, here you have the ability to check out professional equipment and stuff like that, but, don't count social media out. It is another avenue for doing community journalism that can really get your story out there a lot. So, so doing journalism today requires all of us to work together. If you're going to do journalism, you got to be willing to work with others who have opposing viewpoints. Find bipartisan or nonpartisan stories to collaborate on. In my opinion, without getting too political, I feel like our country is getting more and more divided all the time. But I feel like as community journalists, we have the ability to help kind of, close that divide a little bit, because, we usually are, the general public usually is more willing to talk with people who have opposing viewpoints and work with people who have opposing viewpoints. So, get together with lots of different people. There has been a decline in local news coverage and content in recent years, partly because media giants are consolidating and buying many local news stations and pushing propaganda. And again, without getting too political with this, but an example is Sinclair Broadcasting Group. They're currently, I think they're still trying to buy a huge number of local news stations across the country that would then give them 70% of the news stations. They would own 70% of the news stations across the nation. I know there's a lot of people trying to fight that, because then they would be, essentially a monopoly in the news industry. And so, even if the propaganda in some ways, like we're going to watch a video next year that someone put together about Sinclair Broadcasting Group, and it seems like the stuff that they're talking about in the video is a good thing, but in a way it's still propaganda, so just keep that in mind. This video is just astonishing. If you haven't seen this already or heard about it.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
We are concerned about trouble and irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 So you get the idea with that. So it's it's a good message that they're trying to push. They're talking about checking facts and sharing biased stories and things like that. But it's a bit of a contradiction, because what happened here is Sinclair Broadcasting Group sent out a script to these stations and basically told them, you have to say this script. And they made all of the stations that they own say these scripts. And so within like a day or two, like all of these stations across the country were saying this exact same thing, and it's kind of scary.
It makes sense because, coming from the news industry, you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you. Your employer is telling you, read this script, or we'll find somebody who will. And in some ways, I don't blame the talking heads, but, Ben's right. This is kind of what a corporation media can do to its employees. Whereas residents, we don't have anyone over us that says, you can't do this. And it's, especially the government, because it's protected under our First Right Amendments.
Yeah.
So, our First Right Amendment. But yeah, it is interesting how media affects just everybody in that kind of world. So becoming a community journalist, I think the reason I put learn your community and research issues happening locally is because that's the root of it, right? If you don't know your community and you're not talking with people in it, how do you know what's going on? How who do you know? Where are you engaged? Do you go to church with the mayor? Do you are your kids friends with the city manager's kids? Who do you know? So I think the first step of any journalist is to understand the community they serve. And for all of us, it's where we live. The second part is identifying what stories potentially exist, and that'll come by networking with people. I find that, just an off remark by somebody, for instance, and this is, I don't know, Ben, if you saw this story recently in the news, but Metro Transit had a woman deliver a baby on a bus, which was kind of like, it's not a story you hear all the time, but that just little tidbit could lead into something else. Wow, that's interesting. Why was she there? Who helped her? It just leads you to a interesting story that is worth sharing. I mean, but it could be about a lot of other things. So the questions to ask yourself are, what do people care about besides animals? Everybody likes animal stories. Why do people live or visit our area? What are we famous for? What are we known for? And that leads to that. The major industries. Are there any famous festivals that go on? Just off the top of my head, it's not uber famous, but like the Raspberry Festival in Hopkins. That's something that happens every year, and people are attracted to that, and they come do their thing. And then, are there any interesting buildings, or were there any historical events? Just recently, I saw an article about a guy who he slept over at Fort Snelling. Did you hear about that story, Ben? Did any of you guys hear about that one? He's an African American guy who was studying I believe it was the impact of slavery and segregation and stuff. But anyway, it had something to do with Fort Snelling. I'm forgetting the story. Look it up, though. It was worth reading. I'm just not there right now. You got it? Oh.
Yeah. No, I'm not. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all good. But yeah, so as far as finding stories, it can actually be pretty difficult if you kind of shell up and turtle yourself. And I think that for a lot of folks, they'll draw from where, again, the people they know or the organizations they're a part of. For instance, and I don't know, Jeff, do you find yourself getting story ideas from more Democrats or Democrat sources since you do Democratic Visions?
Well, I get them also from, I'm primarily interested in real people. Mm-hmm. And people who are articulate and write, and I'm a member of a writers group, and I've done a number of stories that I got leads from these people, and they're all very, very good. One of the things I know an awful lot about has been light rail transit, and we were the only show in the entire southwest suburbs, Minneapolis, St. Louis Park, to actually give it a fair shake in the press. The Min Post, the Star Tribune, they weren't. They were just covering the hot issue of the LRT as it goes between between Lake of the Isles and Cedar Lake, I believe. Mm-hmm. And no one else was telling the full story. Our local community newspaper, Eden Prairie News, the Sun Current, they were, but we were the only tele-TV people doing it. So, and we put an awful lot of effort into it over the last 3 or 4 years. So that's a case where I knew something, and I figure, hey, doesn't cost us anything to do. It doesn't limit us to 2 minutes. We can do a full half hour. So
there you go. Yeah.
Very cool. All right. I was also going to throw in on part C there, people too, famous people that lived or grew up in your area.
Yeah, actually, like, when Prince was around, everybody started doing stories about him, right? But unfortunately passed.
All right. So what is your story's focus? What are you sharing with people, and what should viewers know by the end of your story, and how should they feel about your story subject? So this is where it really, the storytelling aspect of community journalism comes into it. It's got to be a subject that is interesting to you, but that other people will find interesting as well. And then how you tell that story is really what people take away from it. That's it. That's by the end of it, what do you want people to walk away with? From your story that you've told. Anything to add to that?
No, I think, though, this goes back to that statement we said at the beginning that all storytelling is subjective. Even if you say journalism, yes, they're the champions of objectivity and blah, blah, blah. at the end of the day, storytelling by its nature is subjective because you are the storyteller. You are telling it whether it, depending on how you processed an event or depending on what resources you sought out, you are the actual flaw in the system in the way the story is told. The thing you want to do though is figure out, well, okay, what is that message? Why am I telling this? What is the truth that I am trying to convey in my piece? What is the full story, to Jeff's point? What am I going to be able to share with people that, let's just say, the larger media outlets haven't shared? Are there any details that change someone's perception of an event, right? So I think that's what I would add to that part. Let's move on. So this is the next big thing, researching what resources or sources you'll need to tell your story, whether that's from archival footage, whether that's, again, the people you interview. This is pretty standard, but during an election season, for instance, if there is a hot topic, you are almost required as a journalist to reach out to a Democratic source and a Republican source, right? Because in that world, that would be considered having both sides on a view, right? Or on some sort of subject. But that can apply to, a lot of different things. I'd say, for instance, if there's a new building coming into your neighborhood that you don't like, you'd talk with a resident who lives there, who's going to have to see this building. You'd talk with the developer who's on the other side, saying, well, this is why I want to build this building, right? And then you may even throw in the city and say, okay, well, why did you give permission to have this building be built, right? So it's really about looking at who is close to that story, how are they impacted, and what do you think their view is going to be? You don't want to put words in people's mouths, but inevitably that may or may not happen. Ideally, you'll listen to what they have to say and kind of have a feel for who to seek out, though. So the B-roll part of this is, there are some stories that are B-roll poor. I can remember like almost any finance story is like a snooze fest. I'm just going to be honest with you. All right, no one wants to watch a bunch of floating numbers, and that's why on fancy news they have all the cool graphics and stuff, right? But what do you want your viewers to see? What is that area or who is being affected? And then the sound. Sound is, Ben and I preach this a lot to the kids we work with, but sound is actually, I think, more important than video, because you can always cover bad video, but you can't cover bad sound. And so natural sound could be anything from and I'll go back to my construction example, it could be the bulldozer doing the beep, beep, it could be the rush of traffic going by, it could be a guy yelling out in the distance, just listen, right? So I guess the crux of this is listen to your story and figure out what's that message, what's going on. But yeah, Ben.
I was just going to add that you've touched on this a bit, but like the B-roll and the nat sound really is what drives your story home, I think, and really gets people engaged and interested in your story. If you have a good interviewee and they have a lot of really good things to say, that's great, but after a half an hour of talking head, people might change the channel. But if you get good B-roll and good nat sound and you're good at, in the editing process, piecing that together, it really helps convey your story and make it interesting. And if you watch any of the news, any of the stories that the reporters do, they have a ton of that in there. They'll have a lot of times they have voiceover stuff that they do, and then they'll have interviews intercutting that. But in between those sound bites, they have nat sound, and a lot of times the nat sound even is part of the B-roll. Like maybe like we hear that construction truck, but we also see it at the same time, and that kind of helps. What's the word? It fills in the gaps in a way in between those sound bites, so you don't just have like a bunch of people talk.
And Ben and I commonly cite Boyd Huppert as a prime example of great journalism, because what he does is he has this really fun way of, first of all, he's a great listener, first and foremost. And because he's a great listener, he knows how to write to those sounds of, a girl saying something, and then he'll write a clever line that connects it to another sound, right? And so it's a really pleasant string of storytelling, and it keeps you engaged. The thing, and this isn't a journalism example, but I think one of the best pieces of bringing a viewer to an event or to a moment that I've ever seen, even though it's fake, don't make fun of me, Ben, the opening scene for Saving Private Ryan, D-Day. But if you watch just that opening scene, it has nothing to do with actual journalism, but as far as using natural sound and being in the moment, if you watch that, it feels like you're there. Yeah. And I think that is one of the cool parts of just being a good storyteller, is that engagement part and building up a story where you have a really strong attention getter at the beginning that tells the viewer a little bit about the subject without giving the whole story away. And then you build up who this person is and what the issue is. But at least that's just my opinion on just kind of catching people's attention. I don't know, Ben, if you have something else.
I was just going to say that I've seen Saving Private Ryan dozens of times, but my favorite time that I saw was at my cousin's house, and he just bought this like huge surround sound system, and it was the most incredible experience. It was better than being in a movie theater. It literally sounded like bullets were flying by my head. It was intense. It's really cool.
Yep.
All right, so step 5 is piecing your story together. So this is all post-production stuff. You review what you gathered, all of your interviews, your nat sounds, any other B-roll that you got. Like Dietrich was saying, B-roll can be stuff that you shot. It can be pictures. It can be videos from like an archive online or something like that. Whatever you can find, get your hands on, as long as you get the copyright for it, or if it's available for public use, of course. You gather all of that stuff together and you review it, and you start figuring out how you want to tell your story. How are you going to introduce your story, like Dietrich was just talking about? You introduce it at the beginning, and then you kind of build up, and then how are you going to end your story? Will you use narration or just use the interview natural sound? I've done videos both ways before, and depending on the subject, both of those can work really well. So I've even done videos before where I started piecing it together with just the interview and that sound, and then I did a narration, and then I found out that I didn't like the narration, it didn't fit with the story, and I took it back out again. You figure that stuff out as you go along sometimes.
I was going to say, one of the things that I always found helpful, especially when you're shooting by yourself, because a lot of the time you don't have a photographer with you or a videographer. So one of the things I used to do is I would always try to think of what my opening shot was and what my closing shot was. And in storytelling, I think you guys are familiar with this concept, but bookendings. So you open with a shot that introduces whoever or whatever you're talking about, but then you end with a shot that's almost like the conclusion. It's putting literally the bookend to your story. And for some reason, that symmetry creates a really nice flow, because you build it up to a climax, you make your point, and then you wrap it up with, this is what's coming next, and we'll see what happens at the end. So from a journalism or just a storytelling perspective, you'll see that a lot in shorter news stories if you watch for, I guess, story structure patterns and stuff. In local news, you'll see that nice little build-up, and then they'll end it with something. I'm trying to think of, Ben, have you seen this one by Boyd? It's that one where he and John Mallett took the couch, and they were in a neighborhood in Minnesota somewhere. I can't remember where this is, but they would bring their couch to all these couples on this block and have them sit down and tell their love story. And it was a Valentine's Day special. I recommend you all look this up after our little meeting here, but the way they structured it was really nice because of just that concept of building up all these love stories till they get to, and I'm spoiling it, sorry Boyd if you're out there, till they get to this guy who had lost his wife. And anyway, it was really nice because it gets to that point, and then you see all the neighbors are there for him. So it was really, it was just, I don't know, it was a really pleasant story. But
if we got time, we'll pull it up.
Yeah, we can maybe pull it up.
We should have put one of his stories in here because
yeah,
they are great examples. All right. I could talk about this one a little bit. This is some stuff that I learned from ACM. So just some show ideas that you could do for a community journalism-based show. Bring experts, politicians, etc., together in one room to talk. And they had a great example of a session they did like this, where they went to, I think it was a local like coffee house, or maybe it was a pub or something like that, but they literally just got people together in a room, politicians from both sides, experts, whatever the subject was, they just got together and talked about it. And they said the first time that they did it, they didn't bring a camera into the room because they wanted to build trust and not scare away anybody from the public and things like that. But then they started recording these sessions, and each session they were doing them like once or twice a month. Then they started recording them, and they were able to get a half-hour show out of these sessions. And I thought that was really cool. Another thing you can do is you can partner with local organizations. People do notice when you partner with them for a variety of reasons. For one, you generally put that into your show, and for two, they help advertise for your show. So like things like libraries, schools, nonprofits, even businesses, like for-profit businesses, you could partner with them as well. And it's also a good way to get extra funding for your projects. We are non-commercial here at BCAT, but that doesn't mean that an organization couldn't help fund your project that you're working on in exchange for a shout out in your credits saying thanks for your help type of thing. So definitely lean into those resources available through partnerships. And a lot of those partnerships, like Dietrich said at the beginning, come from networking. You get out there into the community and you meet one person and they know two more people, and those people know two more people, and pretty soon you know a whole bunch of people. I also recommend I recommend this a lot for a lot of different projects, but do one project or collaboration as a demonstration to show what you can do, and that will get more people interested in helping out. And then collaborate with local journalists and news organizations to talk about what's going on. Pretty much every news station now across the country, they're online. You could send messages to them through social media. You can send them emails, things like that. I know a handful of local journalists that probably would be more than happy to get together for a cup of coffee and talk about what's going on. So these were also some things that you're welcome to look up anytime you'd like, but these were some things that they suggested at ACM to check out that are kind of interesting. So Democracy Fund, their website is democracyfund.org. They're a bipartisan foundation established by the eBay founder and philanthropist Pierre Omidyar, I always say his name wrong, to help ensure that American people come first in our democracy. The local Fix newsletter, I just signed up for this myself, and I just got my first email for it, I think today. I haven't actually looked at it yet, but it's a weekly roundup of the best writing on journalism paired with concrete advice, tools, and resources for people who care about local news. And then the conference that I had was the Alliance for Community Media, and their website there, allcommunitymedia.org, has a ton of resources on there. They have links to other resources, and they also post like blog posts and things like that all the time about things that's going on with ACM and with community media in general. So they're really great. The collaborativejournalism.org. This is a hub of resources and ideas related to collaborative journalism. So if you're interested in collaborating with other people and other organizations and stuff on a certain topic, check that website out. ProjectFacet.org. They're an open source project to help newsrooms manage the multifaceted challenge of planning and executing collaborative projects across different platforms with partners of various sizes and resources. And then the Trust Project. They research and verify trusted news sources. So, there's a lot of stuff, especially that's probably the biggest downside of social media nowadays, in my opinion, is there's so much stuff out there that is just not true, that people they see it and they go, oh my God, and they share it immediately without checking their sources and checking their facts. And then, tons of other people share it as well from what that one person shared. And pretty soon you have this viral message going around that's just not at all true. And so the Trust Project is a great resource to check on those news stories. So, and then I just want to show you, this is just kind of an inspiration. It's a really, really great video that ACM put together 3 years ago, and it has a bunch of people from different community media stations in it talking about the power of community. Whoops. Why did that play? There we go.
Community media, from my point of view, is organic.
It's power.
Public access to me gives me an opportunity to get my word out to the larger community of the town that I can't get to on my own.
This is good programming. This is what people say, well, how come they don't ever write anything good in the news, right? This is the good news.
What we're doing is critical, it's important. We have to stay energized and motivated to do this work in our community, but understand that our real mission is to hold up our part as we encourage others to hold up their part around the planet.
So I was 14, I joined SPNN Set It Up program, which is an after-school program. We created our own TV show that was put out in the public, and I went along, did that till I graduated high school. Currently, I work with Youth Prize. I'm their youth storyteller. I create all their media and content having to do with like telling stories.
It seems like there's been an incessant attack on Black leaders and on Black interests. And we believe we have a right and a duty to respond.
Too often we are encouraged to think of ourselves as insignificant and as meaningless.
Getting involved in a way is telling the world no. And we need more people to say no.
People in neighborhoods can now do what only corporations could do a generation ago.
I'm here live from the mud pit.
Disability Viewpoints can cover disability issues at a little longer length, which the local news hasn't been able to do.
I wanted to share all the wonderful things that life has given to me. I thought, what better way to give back to humanity than to just share from the heart.
Conscious programming to me feels like where we want to go as human beings, where we want to feel alive.
It gives me an opportunity to talk about theater, the arts, writing, directing.
Because it's us, you know, it's the community stepping up and grasping onto their own show.
I connect my culture by myself, but Olelo provide a facility for me.
And that gave me the opportunity to go out in the field and actually use the equipment and get more hands-on experience with it.
If it wasn't for that, you know, I wouldn't be where I am doing what I'm doing today.
Not only did people come up to me and say, I saw you on TV talking about your organization, they asked about it.
And that's how I learned the value of being a producer, because you touched one life and a family that was sitting there, brought them together at that time. I really enjoyed that.
This station broadcasts a lot of different things.
Olelo is unique in that it is offered to everyone who lives on this island.
What my ancestors and my kupuna and my parents and family have done, I get to do it in my own way. Growing up, they've instilled a sense of deep responsibility as being able to keep the stories alive.
Without this opportunity, we might lose it one day.
It gives us an avenue in which we can be heard and also be seen.
And I think public access allows that.
It's given me a chance that I wouldn't have had at the bigger markets or the bigger studios.
It's a powerful mechanism that actually makes people think about things. There's news shows, there's entertainment, there's dialogue, there's debate, and that's all healthy. And I think public access gives that opportunity to everyone. I think without it, we'd be less fulfilled, I think, as a community.
Technology affords collaboration that is global and local, and it's accessible. And I think our mission has to be to continue to ensure that this technology remains in the hands of as many people as possible on planet Earth.
I mean, they talk about, it's a pitch for ACM and it's a pitch for public access television, but they talk a lot about in that video about community media and community journalism and how important it is. That's why we also do like these workshops and stuff here too for you guys, and for the public in general. How do I get back to full screen? There we go. Because it's such an awesome opportunity for anyone from the public to be able to do this stuff, to be able to tell these stories about their community. And as you guys who are already members know, I mean, it's essentially free, and just an awesome opportunity.
I was going to say one of the kind of interesting things that I pulled from that video just now, but it got me thinking about how do we define community? Perhaps you're part of a writers group, or for instance, Jeff, I hate to keep telling Democrats, like you're part of that Democrat community, that particular political group.
They don't much like me. But.
Well, that's okay. I mean, not. Oh, I was gonna burn you, but no, I'm not gonna do it because we're face. But I'm just kidding. But how you define your community, and perhaps you are part of. I'll just use this. It's silly. I'm not actually part of this group. But like cribbage, right? I just started learning how to play cribbage, and I saw there was like a cribbage tournament down the street, and it made me think, you know what? Maybe I'll stop by and I'll play a few rounds and see if I can do that. That's a community of cribbage players.
Well, tell me, Mr. Neeson, what kind of B-roll are you using?
Right? Close-ups of the little peg moving. Lots of close-ups of cards doing this.
Make sure to bring your macro.
That's right. Yeah. Oh my gosh. But I think the point that video really drives home is, how do you define a community? Are you part of a group that not many people know about, or are involved in the general public? And is it something that you feel is worth sharing? And if so, what is the story within that community to share? So yeah, that was pretty cool. I like that video.
That's a really great point of what defines community. There's communities within communities within communities. I mean, Bloomington as a whole is a community, the city of Bloomington. Right. But then, like Dietrich was saying, there's various clubs and stuff. Even right here in the Civic Plaza, there's the artistry. We got all this art stuff going on. That's a whole another community. And there's tons of community resources that you can reach out to.
Absolutely. I mean, if you were so inclined, you could make a show literally all about the artists over there. Or if you want to go even closer.
Jeff kind of tried.
Yeah, I was going to say even more of a macro. Oh, there you go.
I'm going to do one. The fellow with caricaturist illustrator who has the show down on the Greenberg Gallery gave a talk Wednesday night. And he was fascinated. I thought he lived in New York. He lives in Prior Lake. And he said, "Yeah, let's do this." So in January, we'll have time to do it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, really cool.
That's exactly it.
And the thing is, he's a voice. This guy's a nationally known illustrator. Who knew about it? And there's another guy who lives out in Victoria, and he was a professional, political cartoonist on the East Coast out of Boston for 30 years. He and his wife moved to Victoria in Carver County. No one knows he's there. I do. I've been wanting to do a story with him for a long time. Now, these are people that are well known, but we never hear from them, on local television, rarely in the Star Tribune, hardly in the Minneapolis magazine, St. Paul. So this is an opportunity for us to give well-known people a serious bite that's longer than 20 seconds. We can give them a full half hour.
Or of course, what I think is kind of interesting is we don't celebrate these people when they're alive and you can actually talk with them, but when they pass away, all the memorials come out and suddenly it's like, oh, everywhere, memorial.
Yeah.
Well, why not talk to the people who are doing great work in our communities, right?
Well,
so that's a good point.
Well, this illustrates a really good case in point where you can do what are real standard old-fashioned television where it's just two people talking and you're learning something, which you don't get to on all the other shows that are politically involved, you don't get that shot. You know, the balance is stupid. It's artificial debate, and people are saying the same expected things over and over again. So I'm trying to get my colleagues from television more involved in this kind of work because, you know, they can do much more right now, given the trends of where things are going.
Very cool.
Anything to add, Ben?
No. So, want to get started? Well, most of you guys are already members here and stuff, but if you're interested, if you haven't already taken classes, we have video production and editing classes here at BCAT. We are open to Bloomington residents, as well as through our partnership with Southwest TV. We are open to Edina, Eden Prairie, Hopkins, Minnetonka, and Richfield residents as well. And so, I mean, like I said, it's essentially free. You can come in and learn these classes. You know, they're pretty basic production classes, but they get you started in this stuff. And then you can use the facility and equipment as much as you want, as often as you want, to be able to tell stories like this. So, and then, like we've been talking about throughout this whole thing, networking with people around town and listening closely, and you may just come across a good story to share. And that's kind of a point I was thinking of earlier on too, is a lot of the time, you know, you may not even be going out looking for a story, or maybe you are looking for a story and you come back with a completely different story. Because when you're at these events, sometimes stories tell themselves while you're there. And so, yeah, just get out and network. And
yeah, I mean, I think that's the great part about community journalism. Again, we keep repeating ourselves, but it is that, what is the actual story at an event? Is it the big hubbub going on, or is there a story there that would have more meaning than what everybody else is focusing on? And I think what makes a really good journalist is someone who is always curious about why people are doing what they're doing and how things impact one another. But it's looking for those, like Jeff mentioned, where a lot of people see like challenges and barriers and stuff. You can see opportunity as well, though, and kind of having that mindset of not going negative, so to speak, because I think one of the things a lot of news, just that term, even, you know, whether it's the president saying fake news, there's a negative connotation to it, whereas news doesn't have to be negative. It's how and what you decide to focus on and present to the world that I think can make a better impact. Like, I used to, now that I'm not in the news industry anymore, I don't care if I say it, I used to actually be subscribed to a website that was just positive news, because I got so sick of covering like car accidents and shootings and murders and, you know, negative. And I always would think to myself, there's got to be something good going on in this world. And sure enough, there are, but you have to focus on that and choose to find stories that are kind of uplifting in that way. That's just my 2 cents, though, on that whole business. But anyway, go on.
Well, that's pretty much all that we've got. We can do some Q&A if you guys got any. I'll check the social media feeds. And
what are you guys interested in covering? Jeff, I already know. You cover, like, everything, so...
Hardly.
I mean, I guess for me, stuff that I'm always kind of interested in is, well, I don't know, I guess kind of like utilities and stuff here, and like resources.
Sure.
Like, I ride the bus a lot. Like, I've always kind of wondered, like, who actually are our bus drivers? Not like in any sort of suspicious way, but just like the amount of stuff you have to put up with as a bus, or maybe it's more positive than I think. I think like it would be a very stressful position, but maybe the people who do it love it. And, you know, there was just a thing about Metro Transit needing to cut some routes because they didn't get as many drivers. And so thinking about, who drives, or who are the bus drivers, or things like, you know, trash and recycle. Like, where, you know, I'm relatively new to Bloomington, but I'm impressed with the amount of recycling that I see, or the fact that they just started doing composting that I read in the paper. And, you know, what makes one community choose these things, and what sort of things do they have access to that other communities don't.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's a really
cool.
good point.
I was going to tell you that my grandpa used to drive bus for Metro Transit. He's no longer alive, but this was back in the 70s and 80s, I think. And there was this great article that one of my family members dug up a few years ago that on his, I don't even know if it was on his birthday, it might have been on maybe the last day before he retired or something like that, all of his regular riders that saw him every day, they loved him so much that they baked him a cake and brought him a cake and some gifts and stuff, and it was really cool. It was in the Star Tribune or something. So yeah, I mean, I think it'd be really cool to do stories about the bus drivers. I think they probably have a lot of really good and interesting stories to tell. So.
A couple of years ago, a transit-oriented group in North Minneapolis asked me to do a story on they needed more bus service up there, and the Met Council and the city of Minneapolis do have plans. But I learned in talking and listening to people that there are plans, and then there are more plans, and there are more plans, then there's no issues. So how do you reach people? I think your bus driver story is really great. And my thing was, I didn't just want to do a news type story. I said, what's really going to make an impact on city councils and the Met Council in the state is to show how difficult it is for a commuter to go from Minneapolis to maybe St. Paul College or the University of Minnesota. It's 2 or 3 transfers. Or if they have a job out in Eden Prairie or Hopkins, it can take them an hour and a half with all the transfers. And that does not dawn on people. Now that's an easy thing to do. Now I ended up not doing anything just because things got too busy, and it would have taken a lot of work. But I encourage you to call the media people up at the big bus companies and say, this is what I want to do, and they'll tell you what they're going to want to control what you say, but I think it'll be pretty cool on that. You can ride on the bus with the driver and interview them and all that. That's a fabulous story. I meet bus drivers in various cigar lounges I go to. Some are retired, some are not. One of my best friends, Bruce, drove buses, Twin City Transit buses, for about 6 or 7 years when he was a young, foolish man. But that showed him a lot about community and how different this entire metro area is. His bus went different routes, of course, went from this kind of community to a different kind of community. Really interesting guy. I've met guys who drive, who are conductors, and not conductors, but motormen on light rail transit trains. And I learned then, and Met Council doesn't tell you about it, that about 3 years ago, a lot of the drivers were very kind to the homeless people in the wintertime. They'd let them ride, fall asleep. They wouldn't get tickets or get kicked off. Now, that's a story no one wanted to let out because these people needed a home. But, you're going to find a lot of stories.
I was going to say, one of the things that you both kind of touched on, the emotion part of it. Again, this is another trait I think good journalists have, is figuring out the emotional tie-in. But a common one is empathy, right? When you start to empathize with someone and try to really understand what their life is like, and figure out, like Jeff was mentioning, what is their day? Like, when they wake up, how difficult is it for them to wait at a bus stop for 15 minutes, transfer in another one for 10 minutes, wait there, transfer to another one, and then finally get to their destination? If you really think about it, that's stressful. That's a lot of stress on people. Or on the reverse side, you mentioned the bus drivers. I saw a story about this bus driver who was driving through North Minneapolis. He got attacked, by one of the people who was riding the bus. It may seem like, oh yeah, he's just a bus driver, but they're out there serving the general public. They're people. They're living their lives, and it's not perfect.
Another rich area is, and City Pages did a wonderful investigative story on this about a year ago. Prostitution along Lake Street.
Oh, I hear about that.
And kind of closer to the Mississippi River. That's where a lot of Johns from the suburbs drive in and pick up girls. And the article is really good because it told the lives of some of these young girls who were there. And that, yeah, I wanted to have that reporter on her show, but I can only do one show a month, so I mean, go ahead, take that one too.
It's actually a surprisingly big problem, that and sex trafficking.
In Minnesota, especially.
You wouldn't think that there'd be.
No, we don't hear
Northern
enough about
Minnesota.
it. In Eden Prairie, it's an issue. You know, our issues are corporate officers who abscond with millions of dollars illegally from their company, plus the other lower life things.
Right. Yeah. But that kind of that strategy, the storytelling strategy, and I'm just bringing it back to no matter what your opinion is, whether you're for or against something, placing a viewer in someone else's shoes, and it goes back to the Saving Private Ryan thing, which strangely enough it works. But stick with me. If you're in someone's shoes and you as a storyteller can present what that life is like, you'll see, for instance, and this is all over Facebook and it's kind of a common thing, people will do time-lapse montages of people getting ready in the morning, right? You'll see the quick brush teeth, shoes tied, pouring coffee, this, but it shows a time montage of what it's like for them day to day. And it's effective. That particular technique is really effective at showing how arduous something is, how difficult it is to get from A to B or to do something, the process of making something, for instance. So I think though you're on the right path. That's pretty cool, that idea. So I support you. Go get them.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome idea.
Yeah, Brent, do you have any ideas that you were thinking of?
I'm more curious about the opportunities of if you do put something together. Would you have to have a whole half-hour show to do this, or are you willing to take 2 to 4 minute pieces or something like that and plug them in wherever you have holes?
Yeah, I actually was just thinking the exact same thing. The majority of the programming on BCAT's channel, and I imagine your channel is probably the same, is half-hour or hour-long programs, but a lot of the time those programs run short, sometimes by up to 10 minutes. A half-hour show ends up being 20 minutes long, and instead of, we got a lot of great stuff on our bulletin board. We have an informational bulletin board that always runs in the background, and so when there are gaps in programming, you'll see that bulletin board. But I do try to, especially if it's a significant gap, anything more than like 2 minutes, I try to fill that with some shorter pieces. So I do accept those. I have quite a few of them, and I am always looking for more because, eventually those do get kind of old and stuff. So playing them all the time. But absolutely, it's not for my channel anyway. Anything between like 2 and 4 minutes will probably get played more often than something that's longer than 4 minutes, because I don't have a lot of gaps that are 8 to 10 minutes long, but they do come up every now and then. But yeah, absolutely, and I think that that's an awesome way to start in something like this, is making a shorter piece to get your feet wet, and then you can always use that piece later on if you decide you want to do a half-hour show. You can use it as a segment in that show. So yeah, absolutely.
Would there be any opportunities where something that you do produce might be picked up by the local in-house city cable thing as a news story?
It's possible. There have been stories, that have been picked up by local and national news that came out of community media. It's absolutely possible. And of course, you own the right to everything that you create, so you can say yes or no on what news agencies are allowed to get part of your story. But like Dietrich was saying with his example of the story that he did, CNN and these other companies ended up coming in and doing their own interviews and stuff. So you can't really prevent that. But yeah, it can definitely get picked up. As far as, I don't know if you're meaning more as far as like trying to sell your story.
Not so much sell, but just have the opportunity, like here in Bloomington, they have their own city news channel, and they have their reporter in that. Would they ever consider possibly using another person's report on something or a feel good, as long as it's not too long. I don't think any others. How long their segments
That's
run
a
now?
great
15
question.
minutes, half hour, or I mean, do they need filler stuff for
like the city and
Yeah,
stuff?
yeah.
Probably
depends on what you're covering, though.
Yeah, it probably depends on what you're covering. Generally, it's usually the stuff that plays on the government channels, the stuff that's produced by the government employees. I mean, I've only been with Bloomington for a year and 9 months, but in that time, I can't think of a time where a public access story was shared or kind of picked up by the government side of things. That's why we have public access, though, because there's been times where there have been times where both public access people have heard about an event or a business or organization or whatever through something they saw on the government side, and they went out and told their own story, and vice versa. The city has told stories that have been told before, and that's fine. If there's crossover stuff, that's great. But I don't know if it would necessarily get picked up. Your actual story would get picked up. They'd probably tell their own.
They'd probably do what the other news agencies do and shoot their version of it. But that doesn't mean your story's not worth telling or that it's a bad idea.
No.
I think one of the best parts of, if you find a story that's so unique that only you can tell it, that's when it becomes one of those things where people will ask you for a copy or permission to use it.
Boyd does that a lot.
Oh, so much. Well, Boyd, so that's unfair, though. Boyd's built up such a great reputation and just network of so many people that he gets story ideas all the time from people all across the state, just based on his reputation. But for someone who's local, I think the stressor here is that as you get to know more people and you become close with them and they trust you, they'll open up more, and when the moment is right, they may tell you a story that they won't tell anyone else. And that's kind of, I think, why journalists in general protect their sources so closely, because they spend years building up trust and building a relationship with people. But that's not to say that any of you couldn't either. I guess for instances, Ben, did you see? Okay, I keep asking him did you guys see that story about the little boy who got to know the garbage? There's a garbage worker who would come by every day. This little boy was fascinated with the truck. So on his birthday, the garbage worker came by. It's a total cutesy story. But the little boy was there, got to meet the garbage worker and pull the levers on the truck, and it was the greatest thing ever. Doesn't seem like it's a big deal. But that was a unique story that, unless you knew about that particular relationship, you would have, no access to it. And it's very cute and it's very sweet. But it's a story I had just seen someone else tell. I couldn't go out there and say, hey, repeat that event for me. You know what I mean? So depending on who you guys meet and who you talk with, you'll run across a story like that. Not the same thing, but one that only you can access and only you can tell. And I think that's the key part of the community journalism, is going back to that idea of knowing your community.
And
But
I
digress.
I'm getting stuff on the city channels. I think that you know this stuff. You just talk to the director of the media department.
Yeah.
And you produce it in a style that fits their style.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then I've had some informal discussions with the city of Eden Prairie about cross promoting what we do on Channel 15 and Channel 16 here, Eden Prairie's government channel, and then letting the city, say, announce special events or when council meetings are on the public access channel.
Mm-hmm.
I see no reason why that couldn't happen. And at least that lid was open to talk further about it.
Yeah.
So
The worst they can do is say no.
that's okay.
I'd say give it a shot, Brent. If you have an idea or something.
It's not like the evil government's going to take over public access. No, they're not. They're the people who administer.
Or will they, Jeff? Will they? We're all out to get you. I'm just kidding.
Inquiring minds want to know.
I mean, but if you got enough pieces from several different people, would you be willing to put together a half-hour show or help them assemble something? Just on community.
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, from an Edina standpoint, I believe I can speak for my boss. If you're watching, don't fire me. I would say that generally a communications department wants to control the message of a city.
Sure.
And so their emphasis
No, not so much
is-
with the city, but I mean, just as a public access.
Oh no, public access is free speech. You can
No,
pretty much
but
put
I mean,
whatever you want.
would
Like, are you saying would I help?
would you help them
Oh.
coordinate maybe putting together several news stories and
Would
make
you?
your
I
own
mean-
BCAT news?
Oh, do like a sort of in a way
Magazine.
a
Like a magazine show. That's a great-
a staff produced show, but
magazine
take
or,
stories
or
from
producer show.
Well, right, but you mean like I would kind of oversee it, and
Well,
then
or,
piece
or
it
at least
together,
help
or-
coordinate it to get it done and that thing.
Yeah.
But you'd have to have probably, what, 4 to 6 pieces of, 4
Yeah.
minutes or so, or, but.
I think it'd actually be. I mean, I think it'd be pretty cool, and yeah. I mean, I'd probably myself, I would probably kind of put it out there as sort of like a BCAT highlights in a way type of thing.
No, that
yeah,
sounds cool.
taking stories from different shows that have been submitted to me, and then piecing it together into like a half-hour sort of review sort of thing.
I don't know if I mean, because it's interesting because as a public organization, I'm not sure if we're allowed to like take a stance on anything, but I mean, we're allowed to air your content. So like, say for instance, you had multiple stories and you had a few other folks who wanted to submit and band together to make a show.
Yeah.
I think Ben could probably say, yeah, that's cool, but BCAT as an organization or SWTV as an organization couldn't say SWTV or BCAT presents these opinions.
I see what you're saying.
You see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So you can air it on the channel, but it'd have to represent your viewpoints and, and the group that you make. But I don't see anything wrong with organizing that if the other producers
Well,
agree
like,
to do it.
This is a variety of things that have been going on this past month.
sure.
On the southwest or city of Bloomington or that
Right.
type of thing.
Yeah.
Just kind of a recap.
Yeah.
Well, and like, I mean, I do occasionally, I haven't done it a lot, but since we started a YouTube channel and Facebook page, I have shared some of the shows that producers have made on there. But again, like Dietrich said, it's not really me saying BCAT presents this kind of thing. If I were to have like stories submitted to me and I put together a half-hour thing of maybe 3-4 stories or something like that, I would have to essentially I would have to host the show and say like, this is a story that so and so did recently, and like it does not express the views of BCAT kind of thing, I mean, it's an
big
interesting
disclaimer at the bottom.
Yeah, no,
right?
but yeah.
It's an interesting idea, and I definitely would be interested in talking about it more. I mean, I'd love to do a half hour, like once a month, do a half hour show about what's happening at BCAT, and some of that type of stuff would help fill in that half hour for sure, because I don't know what I'd always talk about. But the problem with me personally here is being the only employee, I just don't have time, and if it's like things that are produced by our producers, then
Take the best 5 minutes from 6 shows, and you got a half-hour show.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that. Yeah, let's just say, for instance, that
Sort of like your cinema judge
correct.
thing
You
type
can
thing.
string it together and just say, these are some samples of the shows that are on BCAT. That's fine.
Yeah.
But
I've considered doing the worst of Democratic vision.
Oh, I like that idea, Jeff. Come on.
Yeah, just the real boring policy wonk politicians.
That'd be hilarious.
Yeah, call it the snooze hour.
You could put in the fun sound effects and the.
No, you won't need that.
just break it into multiple parts.
Yeah.
It would really be too long.
You mean the gag reel?
Too long.
Well, gag reels are never that funny.
No,
they're not. They only
depends.
show them to drunk journalists and corporate people at their Christmas parties.
Sounds about right.
And they're laughing then, but
Right.
no, sober, no, they're not funny.
They're not at all.
Is this the story, Elk River, the neighborhood of love?
Yes.
Is that the one?
That is a fantastic. Yep, that's it.
Why don't we watch it? It's 4 minutes.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, Nat Sound.
In Sherburne County, Elk River.
Nat Sound.
County seat. In Elk River, Holt Avenue and 5th Street Northwest
Nat Sound.
is
Sorry.
the love seat.
So I took one look at her and I said, I'm gonna marry him. I did, really.
She just knew it a good thing when she saw it, that's all.
Wally and Gail Fox have been side by side in matrimony for 52 years. In many neighborhoods, that's deserving of a seat of honor. But on the Fox's block, theirs is a common bond.
We've been married for 52 years.
Kathy and Hartley Dole were 17 and 20 when they tied the knot.
He's a good man. He works hard. He cares about me, I know. I know.
It's just like, yep.
Yep.
Tied the knot in a rope that extends 4 doors down.
It's been a wonderful life with my beautiful bride.
Where Henry and Marion Tenbrock have also been cooking for 52 years.
Wonderful. Great cook. That's why I had a little extra weight on me.
I didn't put it in your mouth.
And they're just warming up.
I'm Don Coder, and this is my wife Joyce. We've been married 65 years, and it's going to be 66 years in August. We're from the old school. Really old.
Bye-bye. See ya.
On this block, not old enough.
How are you today? Good. February 12th, 1942.
Today, Pearl and Ralph Stahlberg are marking 70 years.
Happy as can be. Just like we were in our right mind.
Liars. You know, celebrating in a neighborhood where marriage still means something. A spatula-shaped block, home to 6 couples committed to each other for
Spatula.
more than 50 years.
Love it.
For better.
We were married in 1947.
Or for worse.
But she was my sweetheart then and still is, no matter what the circumstances are.
Roger Osby met his wife Hannah in high school. They've been married 64 years.
Hannah, you love me? Huh?
Alzheimer's means Hannah must stay in a nursing home now.
Are you tired, Hannah?
But every day Roger still sits with her.
And
before he goes home and sits alone.
do I still love her? Well, I'll tell you, I think when something like this happens where they're vulnerable, it's even deeper, the love you have for each other. It is for me.
Perhaps there's something in the water in this neighborhood of love.
Oh, yeah.
Or love in the air.
Hi, come on in.
With our nation's fabric ripped by divorce, 6 couples on the same block
Here we go, Mom.
have kept their unions intact for more than half a century through love and hard work. And even when life
Earliest days.
deprives them of a kiss,
Oh, hey, neighbor.
love
Bless you.
finds a way.
Are you serious?
Hey, Roger. Mwah.
I want to say they're all on Hannah's approved list, otherwise I couldn't be happening.
And for all you newlyweds watching, we couldn't help but notice the house 2 doors down the street. Feel free to sit for a while, maybe 50 years. Boy Cooper, Care 11 News.
Wasn't that wonderful?
Train
though?
starting and ending.
The book ending, right? The other thing that he does so well is mixing their dialogue with his dialogue. And you'll notice he intersperses it in between. So he'll break a sentence up, put their line in that's short and quick, come back in with his line, mix it into a Nat sound, and then bounce back. That's why I think if you study just the structure of his storytelling, it's amazing.
I got a couple of comments.
Pieces.
These are the kind of people that drive me crazy, but it was a wonderful, wonderful story. And also the technique of narration with a an ad sound and a
Yeah.
voiceover. It's frequently way overdone on some of the stations. This guy's good at what he does, so it's really fine. And even when you do a talk show, some of our guests can't get it out, or they're too technical or whatnot. That's why I work in B-roll. It not only helps my story, I can cut them short, and then I'll have Tim or our announcer kind of voice in 10 seconds what it took that person 30 seconds to say. And it makes a stronger piece. It just makes the point.
Well, you mentioned that these are the kind of people that drive you crazy, but it was still a good story, and as good as the story is, it could have been really bad.
Oh,
like there are
absolutely.
you say that they drive you crazy, and they could have drove you crazy even more by not having all of those those net sounds and the way that he tells the story.
Well, they're all really nice people.
Yeah.
I know that.
It could have cut from like interview to interview and like just been really boring.
Well, that's what I would have done. But but my comment about that is that it's so hard getting stories out of Minnesotans sometimes. It really is. And particularly these kinds of wonderful people, they're really hard on reporters. I'm sure you'll agree.
I won't lie to you. There have been times where certain unnamed folk in the world will continue to talk and talk and talk after they've made their point. And it's hard to get a sound bite from them that is right to the point and full of character because they keep going on and on.
And then we have the exact opposite personalities here too, where they you ask them a question, they'll say like, yeah, I did that.
Ask the
wife.
Right.
No, you're definitely right.
The wife knows more about that than I do.
Right.
They just give answers that don't work at all for anything.
Right. Right.
No, I grew up with people like this, so I am one of them.
I was going to say, we got to do the story on you.
Yeah.
We should do that in Bloomington.
Absolutely.
And couples.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't have anything else to really add on community journalism, but
see if there's any questions online. Do you guys have any other questions at all about anything?
About breaking into it, or I think one of the other things too, at least for me when I was starting out as a reporter, I used to be so nervous about talking to strangers, and really asking them about, tell me a little bit about yourself, and what's your life like, and what's that, and why'd you choose this profession? I'm just thinking of your bus driver story, like, if you were to interview a bus driver, you may ask, well, what's your backstory? And I'm sure you'll find a variety of folks. Maybe one's a retiree who just, decided, hey, I need a part-time job. Another might be, this was the only job that was available, and I took it, and I'm still looking for another full-time job. Or, there's so many different stories out there.
How much time do you spend warming up a person that you're going to interview before you actually roll tape on them?
Great question. So I would actually, as I'm setting the camera up, I would always put the tripod down and actually get my camera ready. I would hit record as I'm just talking and we're off, and they'd be talking because they're more natural.
Sure.
And by the time we actually get to, hey, I'm going to formally ask you this, we had already would generally build somewhat of a relationship, so that way it's not cold turkey just kind of coming in. But for some folks, I think it actually works better if you don't tell them that you're recording at all, and you just start talking with them. You hit record and just let it roll, because I've noticed, at least with certain people, that when a camera goes on them, right, they turn into almost a different person. Right, they suddenly lock up, and it's like, oh, I'm on camera. I can't, talk, and I'm not as, fun. And then for others, it actually may bring them out of their shell.
Sure.
So I mean, you kind of have to feel it out beforehand, I think.
Yeah, but don't you spend like 5-10 minutes just talking to them, just to get them warmed up? I mean, so And it also maybe give you some ideas on what kind of questions you want to ask too, right?
I think ahead of time you usually have a pretty, somewhat of a good idea of what you're going to talk about. But I'll give you a for instance. If you are trying to interview somebody that you think has committed some sort of crime or done something like that, you don't want to give them an idea of where you're going with questioning, right?
Yeah.
But if it's somebody you know, like a kid, I'll use a child for instance. Children are notorious for being hard to interview because they're kids, right? Like they're not used to all the social kind of mannerisms we all had built up. But what I've noticed with them is that when some of the best video you'll get of a kid is when they're curious about a camera, right? And they start looking at it and you just talk with them. And you don't tell them it's on or anything, you just start showing them a camera and they warm up to you. And then you don't need to prep them or anything, it's just a natural kind of curiosity. But in that case, that is the warm-up, is saying, hey, I'm so-and-so, it's nice to meet you. What do you think about this camera? And then, you know, you start getting into that, and then you lead into whatever you want to ask them about. I guess for adults, it depends on what your story is.
Depends on the story and depends on the person.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times you don't know what the kind of person they are and the kind of personality they have until you get there, unfortunately.
Right.
But some people will meet ahead of time for that reason, just, you know, without any cameras or anything like that, just to try to get to know them a little bit better. And,
sure.
Yeah.
Or talk over the phone at least. Another technique that some people do is, Dietrich talked about hitting record while he's still like setting up. You can also let it keep recording when you're done, and you say, "Oh, we're done," and pretend like you stopped recording, but you actually let it keep going, and then you kind of have a more casual conversation. And a lot of times you'll pick up a lot of good sound bites from that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, when you do studio shows here, I'm thinking of doing that. You know, because our hosts and our guests are far livelier once I say, "Hey, thank you.
Yeah.
Don't move." No, I got to work out a deal and understanding for the number of hosts that we have. I'm going to say that, but you keep talking, okay?
Yeah. There is a certain strategy to it, though, Brent. I think, you know, again, it depends what kind of story you're chasing, right? So if it's about a corrupt politician in your town, for instance, you don't want to let them know that you're looking for what they know about a certain issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
But say you're doing a heartfelt piece like Boyd did on those folks. Well, of course you can tell them what the story is about. It's about your marriage and when you met the love of your life, and you know, how'd you guys all move on this block? And this is kind of what we're thinking of doing. Because then they instantly will start to trust you. Just it's natural. They'll say, "Oh, okay, so this is why this nice person is coming and seeking me out and all that stuff."
And that's really what the like warming up comes down to is building trust, getting them to trust you.
Yeah. I think it's even go back to that silly cribbage example. It'd be the same thing if I said, "Oh man, I'm gonna come in here and record you guys playing cribbage," blah blah blah. You know, you may get people, I don't know, either just being nervous as they're playing or acting out. But if you go in there and say, for instance, "Hey, I'm a new cribbage player. Can you guys like teach me some rules and how does this game work?" And take an interest in them as a person. Say, "How long have you been playing cribbage? When did you start? You know, who taught you? Your grandma or
the board game store on Lake Street near Lyndale would be a great place.
Oh,
to do
definitely,
stuff.
100%.
You know,
yeah.
And but you got to gain trust with.
Oh yeah.
And permission from the owner of the store to do it.
Absolutely.
I've never seen anything done there. I think it'd be great.
That's a good one, yeah.
And they have a coffee machine now too. So.
Just remember to make sure you don't turn it into an advertisement or a commercial.
Sure. Yeah, that's the other trick is
when it comes to businesses and organizations, it can kind of steer that way, especially like especially businesses. They might try to steer it that way. But you got to make sure that they don't, you know, pitch any of their products and try to especially talking about prices is a no-no with community media. But you can always, you know, as the producer, you can always cut that stuff out if they do talk about it. You just cut that sound.
One story I've always wanted to do about professionals is just to cover the local media as they cover politicians and other events. You know, we've all seen a bank of cameramen standing around making big money, doing nothing, for someone to walk out of City Hall, and that's all they get paid for this nonsense, okay? And it's time that you know, we take them on, okay?
I have a feeling a lot of the photogs and the reporters on the field would probably tell you to just get lost. You know?
Who cares? That's part of our. We're taping them doing that.
Yeah, I mean, you have the right to do it. So.
Jeff,
Sure we do.
I want you to start that show on public access, reporting the reporters. You
Well,
just,
it's
you
about
say,
time.
why are you out here? What are you doing?
You know, they're having Channel 5 sends helicopters up to cover something that happened 8 hours ago and has nothing to do with a fire or a car accident. You know, they got a chopper shot here. So there's a lot of absurd things. Sinclair also owns one of the Eden Prairie stations. There are two commercial stations in Eden Prairie, and Sinclair News does a magazine show, a public affairs show on Sundays, and it's very, very well done. And to me, it seems very journalistically viable.
Okay.
And they're doing a much better job at it than Channel 4 does or Channel 5 does. It's a magazine show on public affairs. And so that's kind of, I'm kind of interested in that. What's going on here? Okay, what are they? How are they trying to weasel in here? So
steer the conversation.
Yeah, but you might try and look at it. I forget. I'll send you an email about where it is. Take a look at it. They have a young female reporter who's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean
They're doing a better job than the local news stations are in terms of a news magazine or public affairs.
Well, and it's kind of interesting too that going back to one of the first things I was talking about, the news culture. Because they have been and were and maybe still are stuck in that idea of you have to find a story in one day, get all the information you can, process it, package it, and air it at 5 p.m. You know what I mean? So within that time span, if you take a very complicated issue like the Southwest Light Rail line, or we could throw a number of examples out there, anything really, depending on that time crunch, you know, you're like, that's a rush job no matter what. I mean, how good of a job can you do on a complicated issue in really 4 or 5 hours, right?
That's why the news magazines, which hardly exist anymore anywhere in the country, at the local level, were very, very important, especially here in the Twin Cities, where we had the more reports and the more on Sunday things. At Channel 4, they were really pretty good.
But you guys can do stuff just like that.
I was going to say, that's where you guys come in.
Yeah, but we got to feed our families too, so it does take a lot of time to do those things.
It's true.
But that's why, like, going back to like partnering with organizations and stuff, you know, some of them may be willing to actually finance your project. So, you know.
Yeah,
network.
Definitely.
I mean, you're not going to make thousands of dollars. You're not going to make a full-time job out of it, but
I was going to say, I don't think any journalist went into journalism thinking they're going to
They're gonna
become
make
rich.
thousands,
That's not why you do that job. It's really to be a storyteller and hopefully find a truth that you can share. But I think, again, back to your point, Jeff, like, what is the truth? Whose truth is being shared, right? I mean, it's one thing, for instance, and I'll just, again, boss, if you're watching, don't fire me. It's one thing if I, as a City of Edina employee, go out and I make a story on behalf of the city, right? But it's a totally different thing if me, a resident of Edina, for instance, would go out and make a story about the city and how it impacts my life, right? One side, I'm an employee, so I'm representing the city. On the other side, I'm representing myself. You know what I mean? So it's it's interesting whose truth you decide to seek out. And that's why that thing we were talking about with focus matters so much. So You know, you could take the side of like Metro Transit as an organization, or you could take, not that they're opposing, but you could take the side of the driver who's gotten the worst shifts on the block, and they don't know why, but they're stuck on those shifts, and you can tell their story, you know. So
I suppose kind of relate to that. I mean, I guess at what point are you kind of disclosing things that, like the citizen versus journalist, like the earlier example, like a new building is going up, like you can talk to the city council member, but like if you're saying like, hey, you know, I live in this area, how's it gonna affect me? And they answer, but then you're like, oh, I'm gonna put this into my, you know, half-hour show. Like, I mean, maybe that's starting to get into like legality and ethics or things like that. But I guess, I mean, I guess at what point do you say like, hey, I'm doing this as part of, as being a journalist, as part of reporting the news versus I want to know from personal edification?
That's a great question, because ethics is one of those things in journalism that is always hotly contested issue because of that reason. You know, where is that line where you say I am a journalist or I am a citizen that is being affected by this policy, and I'm pretty upset that it is. That's a great question. I don't know if there's a good answer for that.
I mean, I guess it comes down to your own personal ethics, really. You know, if you want to be upfront with them and say, hey, I'm creating this show and I have some questions about this, you know, you can do that, and there's a chance that you may not get a response then, you know, but if you go about it as a concerned citizen and they give you a response, I mean, technically you still have the right to use that in your show. I mean,
yeah, I mean, if it's publicly, so this is the other hot thing.
But isn't there an issue though if you misrepresent?
Correct.
There something that story.
Oh yeah, that happens all the time where sound bites are taken out of context.
Yeah.
And they're thrown into, and that's what political attack ads generally are sound bites that are taken out of context, that are very quick and easy to digest, but they make someone look horrible. Now, that is a specific type of, I wouldn't even call it journalism, but just being a jerk. But to your point, though, about what may end up happening is, let's just say you go and talk with your mayor, and you're under the guise of I'm a journalist, I'm going to ask you these questions, and then you do a story about how corrupt this mayor is and the policies are horrible and this is what they had to say. Well, they may never give you an interview again. So that's also one of those things that you have to kind of balance in your own mind.
Is there a lawsuit possibility though too that you have to worry about?
No, because it's protected under the First Amendment. I suppose at least we were never subject to that.
If it's a non-public
person,
then you're liable.
Then you're liable because that's slander, right?
Yeah.
But if it's I think if again we're just focusing on public employees. I suppose it's not.
I don't think anyone
officials.
in this forum here will ever.
No. I don't think so. But
do that either.
But I mean, I don't know. I've heard of lawsuits being brought up for sillier things. Why would slander not be one of them? The chances are that if it, I don't know. I guess I've just never been in a situation where I've never put myself in that situation. Yeah. Maybe that makes me a bad reporter.
When you were a reporter, you had the company behind you.
Correct.
You know, that would support you and that type of thing.
Right.
So, but you also had someone overlooking what you produced and finished to protect the company.
Well, I'll give you an example. Now, this is one of the kind of messed up parts about the news industry, at least the way it used to work, and to some degree it is how it works now. Advertising clients. Right? Every news department or news station has an advertising group, right? So let's just say, because he just got out of jail, Denny Heckert, right? Let's just say they were an advertiser with your station. They would probably want you, the sales department would want you to do positive pieces with Denny Heckert about whatever car stuff, right? And let's just say Denny Heckert was a corrupt person, and was doing something horrible. They would not want you, your salespeople would say to you, look here, Dietrich, don't go to Denny Heckert and don't go making them look bad because they give us money to fund our station.
Sure.
Now that's kind of the ethical thing that I really disliked about the news industry in general, because it is run off of who's paying your salary and who's supplying your station with funding. But the advantage of community journalism is you don't have any of that behind you. You can really, if you think somebody's being unfair or corrupt, you can go after them. And I don't think there's, I mean, maybe they'll bring a lawsuit, but if you can prove, again, this goes back to research, if you can prove that they are in fact corrupt, or whatever your stance on them is, and you have evidence.
But they could bankrupt you if they kept going after you and they
They
had the
might,
money
yeah,
back.
they might, but
so,
it's,
I mean, I guess what it boils down to as a community journalist is how badly do you want to tell this story? Like, do you really want this to get out in the public in a truthful way that potentially could come back to you, or do you want to play it safe and say, maybe I'll steer clear of this issue for now or whatever? It's all comes under a personal standpoint on it, I guess.
I was gonna say, a lot of journalists I don't necessarily consider that implicating their life or affecting their life, because what they care about is getting that story out so much. So if that is something you're worried about, then I'd say journalism probably isn't the right field for you, because that's the risk you take, and that's why journalists get killed. I mean, you not you, but I'm just saying journalists, like, whether it's in, I mean,
more mainstream
journalists, but there's reports, there's actually a group that keeps track of journalists who die or are murdered because they are trying to tell the truth about whatever powerful group or person or whatever it is out there that's doing something that's not right or that's unfair, or so that's why journalism's important. But as far as our local community journalists here in Minnesota,
or
I would say,
like we've been saying, stick to the positive stories.
Stick to the positive
Play it
stories,
safe,
Brent.
man.
Just do animal puppy stories, People
Love
like
stories.
That stuff. Love stories, yeah. No, but you bring up a good point. Yeah. So
if you do something controversial, it's always best to have someone else, not these guys, because they have too much going on in their work lives, but someone else who can go over your story and double check and ask you questions. Have you got this right? I mean, that's what happens at regular news stations.
Right.
And it's very, very important, especially with controversial stories.
Oh, fact checking. I mean, that's like the hot issue, because that's why Donald Trump's President Trump's so popular right now, I think, too, is because that whole idea of fake news, of making up news, right? Of making up a truth, or, that sort of thing has become this popular notion. But in a newsroom, that's why you have a producer, an executive producer, a news director who look over your scripts, over your story, to make sure that what you're putting out there is based off of, everything lines up and they feel comfortable saying, all right, we've thoroughly looked at this. Where did you get this information from? Who told you this? So you'll notice with a lot of news stories, and this is how I was trained to, as a reporter, you never give your opinion. You always say, resident, Eddie Bauer says, because now it's an attribution to them, right? You never take it on and say, I believe this, or this is the way things are. You always say, so-and-so says this is happening, or so-and-so, believes this, because then that attribution, the responsibility or the opinion falls on them and not you as a person. And so that's, again, as a journalist or as a reporter, literally the word reporting what someone else is talking about or what they're doing. So that is how you avoid getting attacked, I guess. So yeah, in some ways. But I don't know. I hope that answered the question.
No,
I was like, I don't know. Anyway, I don't have anything else, guys. Anybody else? No? All right, rock and roll.
Yeah, thank you guys so much
Thanks,
for coming
guys, for
out
coming.
tonight.
Thank you.
Hope you learned something.